He was asked which country he most admired and referred to China.
There's a level of admiration I actually have for China. Because their basic dictatorship is allowing them to actually turn their economy around on a dime and say, we need to go green as fast as we need to start investing in solar. I mean, there is a flexibility that I know Stephen Harper must dream about, of having a dictatorship that he could do everything he wanted, that I find quite interesting.
Fear is a dangerous thing. Once stoked, whether by a judge from the bench or a prime minister with a dog whistle, there is no way to predict where it will end. These are troubling times. Across Canada, and especially in my home province, Canadians are being encouraged by their government to be fearful of one another. For me, it is both unconscionable and a real threat to Canadian liberty. Measure of a society, of a just society, is not whether we stand up for people's rights when it's easy or popular to do so. It's whether we recognize rights when it's difficult, when it's unpopular. We are a society that stands up for people's rights, and when governments fail to respect people's rights, we all end up paying. I think that is the lesson that hopefully future governments will draw from this settlement. We're paying for the provincial vaccine passports to make sure that when someone comes into a restaurant, they'll know they won't be sitting beside a table of people who are unvaccinated. When you go into a gym, when you go to a movie theater, you need to know that if you've done the right things, you get to be safe. You get to be rewarded for having done the right things. That's what it's all about. And those people who still hesitate, who still resist, well, they won't get to enjoy the same things that those who've done their part for others. It seems like a very logical thing. It seems like a very obvious thing.
I started to read what he said. This is a couple of weeks ago. He was, or maybe this is September, but he was talking about people who are not vaccinated. He said they don't believe in science. They're often misogynistic, often racist. No, they're not.
That was not smart of him at all.
Right. He said, but they take up space. And with that, we have to make a choice in terms of a leader as a country. Do we tolerate these people? It's like, tolerate them. Now you do sound like...
Earlier this morning, our government introduced a bill to end conversion therapy in Canada. It's past time to put a stop to this unacceptable, discredited practice that has hurt far too many LGBTQ2 Canadians. Conversion therapy is harmful, degrading, and has no place in Canada. I hope all parties step up, come together, and support this bill.
In Canada, on January 8th, 2022, Bill C-4 went into effect, making it a criminal offense to practice, promote, or profit from conversion therapy.
Conversion therapy, or reparative therapy, is a practice that uses any attempt to alter a person's sexual orientation, gender identity, or expression.
Shortly after the legislation was passed, Justin Trudeau, Prime Minister of Canada, tweeted, "It's official. Our government's legislation banning the despicable and degrading practice of conversion therapy has received royal assent, meaning it is now law. LGBTQ2 Canadians will always stand up for you and your rights."
In Canada's new law, C-4, which if you're not familiar with Canada's new legislation, Bill C-4, that has become law in Canada, the law against conversion therapy, they use LGBTQ2. And that 2 is important because it links back to critical theory and critical race theory because the two is for two-spirit, which is the indigenous Native American, Native Canadian, whatever, Indian way of talking about this kind of identity. It was referred to as two-spirit. So in their intersectional nod to critical race theory, they put LGBTQ2 on the bill there in Canada, because there is an inexorable link between critical theory, critical race theory, and queer theory, and sexual identity Marxism.
Over 4,000 pastors in Canada and the United States have come together to publicly protest the bill, because its broad wording could make merely teaching biblical ethics concerning homosexuality a criminal offense, deserving of up to 5 years in prison.
So what's wrong with homosexuality? A number of things, but just a few in this context. Number one, it's a violation of the created order.
The bill defines conversion therapy as a practice, treatment, or service designed to repress or reduce non-heterosexual attraction or sexual behavior, repress a person's non-cisgender gender identity, or repress or reduce a person's gender expression that does not conform to the sex assigned to the person at birth. The bill also says that conversion therapy is based on and propagates the myth that heterosexuality, cisgender gender identity, and gender expression that conforms to the sex assigned to a person at birth are to be preferred over other sexual orientations, gender identities, and gender expressions. But, of course, the Bible teaches that homosexuality is a sin and a perversion of what God created sexuality to be.
It's the only sin, by the way, for which God destroyed cities with fire and brimstone. It's unique. It's unique. It's not like other sins. It's unique. Not all sins are called abominations. Homosexuality is unique in that regard. Very few sins in that category.
That all people should fight against and repress homosexual thoughts and behavior.
Can someone self-identify as gay and be a Christian?
Someone can identify as someone who is struggling with same-sex attraction. You will struggle.
And some people will call those, will identify that as gay Christians. That's what they will call themselves. You don't have a problem with that.
I have a big problem with that.
You do have a big problem with that.
And I'll tell you why.
As well as all other forms of sexual immorality, and that heterosexual and cisgender gender identity are to be preferred because they are what is true and normal.
He rooted his understanding of marriage in the teaching in Genesis chapter 2. The teaching in Genesis chapter 2 that gave us marriage between a man and a woman for the purposes of procreation, illustration, and sanctification. He also made it very clear that what man is joined together, what God has joined together, man cannot separate. In other words, God is the author of marriage, not man. Therefore, God is the one who defines marriage, not man. Therefore, man does not have the right to introduce the concept of same-sex marriage. Number one, because by definition, it's not marriage, it's another thing. And number two, because by definition, it goes against what was created in Genesis chapter 2.
And Christian pastors and parents are commanded by God to teach the entire Bible to their members and children. The bill does not at all say that it is acceptable for Christians, pastors, and parents to teach biblical ethics, which means it is entirely within the scope of Bill C-4 to imprison Christians for merely teaching what the Bible teaches. So, essentially, in Canada, it is now a criminal offense to teach Christianity. Pastor James Coates of Grace Life Church has already been imprisoned for merely wanting to continue holding church services when the Canadian government prohibited churches from gathering. Coates told Fox News he believes that Bill C-4 is anything but loving if it intends to shut the LGBT community off from the saving and transforming message of the gospel of Jesus Christ. Liberty Coalition Canada facilitated a protest where over 4,000 pastors in Canada and the United States stepped forward to push back against this new tyrannical law. John MacArthur became the chief promoter of this protest in the United States. MacArthur told Fox News, "Ultimately, the dissenters, the ones who will not cave in, are going to be those who are faithful to the Bible." MacArthur continued, "I think it's reached a level there in Canada that it hasn't yet reached here, but it's coming. It's coming fast." This comment by MacArthur is supported by the fact that his Sunday sermon about biblical sexual ethics, which he delivered as part of the protest against Bill C-4, was taken down by YouTube. While Canada may be further along in criminalizing Christianity than the United States, numerous states in the United States already have similar laws that make it criminal to teach what the Bible teaches about sexuality. And the trend seems to be that the number of these laws will continue to increase, not decrease. Of course, what we are experiencing in Canada and the United States is still nothing compared to the much more severe persecution that Christians in countries such as China, Afghanistan, and North Korea experience. But more and more, it's becoming official, even in these Western countries, that if you are a Christian who teaches what the Bible teaches, you are now a criminal.
You mentioned, as I went up to use the bathroom, you mentioned the issue of the mask and the health mandates. People don't even resist that. That's kind of my point that I'm concerned with, is that we've given up so much ground and compromised so much in terms of law in our country because we're not prophetic and consistent speaking against the state on the issue of their limitations. We have all this tyranny across our country, and people yield to it because they assume the state has that much power.
That's right.
And the answer is no, they don't.
That's right.
It's a beast, and it's lying to you because this still is a nation that was developed by the Covenanters and the Huguenots and the Puritans and Pilgrims and everything else. They came to this nation with a historical understanding of a national covenant, and they came with an understanding of common law and biblical law. They gave us these blessings, and they're all dissipating now because not enough men of God are speaking consistently and prophetically in these areas.
Part of that covenantal heritage you're talking about, I'm actually speaking about some of this tomorrow morning in my talk. But part of that heritage means that there are certain laws that even if when you try to pass them are not laws. If you pass a law in our country that says it is okay to murder babies, it's not a law.
I'm resisting it anyways.
But it's not a law. It's not, because you don't have the authority to do that.
Right.
The right to life is given by the Creator. But even if Congress passed a law that said sodomites can marry, that is like saying gravity doesn't exist.
Right.
It's like saying water. We voted that water is going to run uphill now. Right.
It's like saying a man can be a woman.
It is. It's irrational.
Yep. Right.
It's insane, and it is not a law.
And we've come to a moment that, quite frankly, we've seen coming over the past years. And we've talked about it in the news, not just about Ukraine, but about democracies around the world, that we see a bit of a slippage in our democracies. Countries turning towards slightly more authoritarian leaders. Countries allowing increasing misinformation and disinformation to be shared on social media, turning people against the values and the principles of democracies that are so strong. And that slippage over the years unfortunately emboldened Putin and made him think that he could get away with this, that he could get away with it in Ukraine. And that firmness is not just Western democracies like us. That is something that we've heard in our conversations, all three of us, with partners around the world who don't have the same kinds of ties to Ukraine, but are very, very concerned about the violation of the rule of law, the principle that suddenly might be right once again, the principle of territorial integrity, respect for sovereignty, the kind of neo-colonialism that Vladimir Putin is trying to impose upon Ukrainians. That's not going to fly. And the strength and the resolve of countries around the world to say, no, this is a moment to stand for democracy, against disinformation, misinformation, propaganda, and to stay true to these values that have led to respect and prosperity around the world that we continue to need to fight for, including in many different parts of the world, whether it's Afghanistan or elsewhere as well.